So hi Victoria, thank you very much for coming along. This is just to learn a bit about your track record in research to date. So could you begin by telling us a tiny bit about your clinical background?
Sure. So I trained at King's College London as a clinical psychologist, and then from there I went into CAMS for a while, where I worked with young people. And I guess it's at that point where I thought actually maybe I would like to go back into research, because I really felt that we needed some more evidence-based interventions to intervene a bit earlier to try and change some of those trajectories that the young people were on. And so from there I got a clinical research job, so it was called a research clinical psychologist. Then I got 1 year BRC funding, and then I was lucky enough to get my NIHR fellowship.
Can you say a bit about what BRC funding is?
Sure, sorry. So it's the Biomedical Research Centre, which are based or attached to quite a few universities. It'd be well worth kind of finding out whether there's one attached to your university. And so it was a 1 year fellowship where I had to do some research, but also was allowed to do 20% clinical work, and with the aim really of developing a funding application for the NIHR.
Okay, great. So you're currently on a NIHR kind of PhD fellowship. How are you finding it?
I love it. Yeah. So it's really fantastic to get the opportunity to have an idea and then be able to test it out. I think it's a great privilege to be given that sort of time and space to think things through, to come up with something quite novel and quite new, and then be able to work out whether it works or not. It is really challenging, so you have to work hard and you have to work very independently, which is quite different from clinical work. So you don't, well, certainly I don't have quite so much of a team around me in terms of people I see every day, but I have a wonderful kind of research network around me. So I love it, but it is hard work. Okay.
So have you got any tips for people who are looking to begin to get research funding about how to land it?
Yeah. So I think number one would be talking to loads of people. So for me, that meant a few groups. So there was talking to young people with depression. And I did that very early on to really work out whether my ideas had legs or not, but also work out where in the kind of journey through the NHS they would want to receive an intervention and what that would look like. So that was super important for me to develop those ideas and make them very appropriate for the group I was hoping to develop the intervention for. Secondly was supervisors and collaborators. The fellowships provide a wonderful opportunity to get in touch with people whose research you really admire and see whether they'll get on board. And for me, these people have been invaluable to help me refine my research ideas and actually to communicate them as well. It is quite daunting, I think, sort of popping an email to someone who you think's really cool. But actually, from my experience, everyone was super helpful, really insightful, and have been so supportive throughout the last 3 years. And the third group would be people who know the NIHR, so people who've previously got funding, the NIHR advocates, but also kind of attending NIHR events I found really helpful, because it gives you a really good insight into the kind of the philosophy and the values of the NIHR. But it also helps you understand what's practical and feasible within one of these fellowships.
Okay, brilliant. So any tips once you've got the funding to make the most of it?
Yes. I'd get a mentor. So my NIHR mentor is brilliant, because I haven't before had someone who is very much independent from me. And so meeting her regularly has been great to kind of keep me on track, but also to think about things that I might need to in the future. The fellowships are brilliant as well in terms of you get they're really generous with training. So you get it's a great opportunity to cost in training courses that you want to go on and then to make the most of that. And similarly, kind of talking to people and going to conferences is really valuable. I guess the brilliant but challenging thing about the NIHR fellowships is that by the time you've actually got the fellowship, you've got a fairly good idea of what you need to do because your application form is so detailed. So for me, this was great because it meant I could get up and running very quickly. But I think making the transition from clinical work to academic work, you have to be very aware of how you work best, and trying to get that balance between sort of thinking and doing is a challenge. For me anyway, it was. And so for me, again, kind of having collaborators and supervisors who were really interested in the work was brilliant, because then I could kind of make sure that I was thinking things through really carefully as well.
Okay, great. And any tips for people who want to kind of dip their toe in the research world without trying to get funding, about how they can do that alongside a busy clinical job?
Yeah. So I guess there's lots of ways you can do sort of smaller projects. So things like audits, you could do a systematic review. That's quite time consuming though. But you might want to do something like that anyway, given that if you want to write an application. Similarly, you could do things like invite academics to speak at your team, because then you're kind of starting to forge those connections, or apply for kind of small pots of money in terms of like charity grants or something like that. I think if I was back in clinical work at the moment, I was thinking about how do I keep research active. I think what I would do is try to make links with academics and come up with a project together that was sort of able to be embedded within my everyday clinical practice as well. So yes, okay, it is time consuming to do ethics and things like that, but the actual meat of the project is supported by your clinical service, and you have that kind of contact with the academics as well to make those connections again. Because I think, I mean, to be honest, clinicians who are interested in research are a hugely valuable resource, right? In terms of you've got contact with people, you've got loads of ideas because you see the young people or whoever, the population, really regularly. And you know what's feasible. So actually making those connections and maybe developing a smaller project would be one way to go.
Great, that's fantastically helpful. Thank you very much, Victoria. I'm going to stop the recording now.